Maria Lopez worked quietly every night in the huge naval training facility. While the rest of the base slept, her work began. She wore a faded blue uniform, her hair tied neatly back, and she always moved with a kind of calm focus. She didn't complain, didn't gossip, and never got in anyone's way. To most people, she was just the night shift custodian. A single mom trying to make ends meet by cleaning hallways, offices, and training rooms. No one thought there was anything special about her. Every night, she carried her mop and bucket through the long, echoing corridors. The sound of her footsteps mixed with the faint hum of distant machines. She often paused for a second to look at the photos hanging on the walls, pictures of soldiers, teams, and Navy SEAL missions. Sometimes she smiled softly at them, almost like she recognized a few faces, but she never said a word about it. Maria didn't talk much with anyone. When the young officers passed by, she just nodded politely and went back to work. They sometimes said, "Evening, ma'am," out of respect, and she'd give a small smile before returning to her duties. No one ever asked her where she came from or what her story was. To them, she was just part of the background, invisible, quiet, and ordinary. But there was something about the way she moved that didn't match her job. She didn't shuffle like most janitors. Her steps were firm, steady, and careful. When she bent to pick something up, her reflexes were fast. Too fast. Once, a broom slipped from a shelf, and she caught it midair without even looking. The young sailor nearby blinked in surprise, wondering how she did that. Maria just smiled and said, "Mother's reflexes." Then she went back to work like nothing had happened. No one knew much about her life outside the base either. Some said she lived in a small apartment near the docks with her teenage son. Others guessed she had no family nearby. She was always private about it. When people asked her what she did before becoming a custodian, she would simply say, "I used to travel a lot," and change the subject. Her voice carried a strange mix of softness and confidence, the kind that made people curious, but she never gave more details. Sometimes, when the halls were completely empty, Maria would take a break near the training field. The moonlight would fall over the shooting range, and she'd quietly watch the targets in the distance. She would stand there with her arms crossed, eyes focused like someone reliving a memory. Once, she picked up an empty training pistol that had been left behind. She held it for a few seconds, her grip natural and firm, before setting it back carefully. It felt like her hands remembered something her heart didn't want to talk about. Despite her quiet nature, Maria had a warm presence. She often left extra cleaning supplies for the younger janitors or helped the kitchen staff when they needed an extra pair of hands. She was respected among other workers because she never looked down on anyone. She treated everyone with kindness, even those who ignored her. However, not everyone on the base treated her kindly. A few officers made jokes when she passed by. "Hard night for you, ma'am?" they'd say teasingly, or, "You missed a spot back there." Maria never argued. She just smiled and continued working. Deep down, she knew they didn't understand who she really was, and maybe it was better that way. Maria had learned long ago that sometimes it's safer to stay unnoticed. The base was filled with tough, confident men who trained to fight enemies abroad, but Maria had already fought her battles. Just not the kind anyone there could imagine. Her scars were hidden under her sleeves, both the physical and emotional ones. Every morning, when her shift ended, she'd walk home as the sun began to rise. The golden light would touch her face, and she'd take a deep breath, grateful for another quiet night. She'd stop by a small diner to get breakfast and a cup of coffee before heading home. The waitress there, who had seen her every morning for years, once asked, "Maria, don't you ever get tired of cleaning the same floors every night?" Maria smiled and replied softly, "It's peaceful. You can think a lot when the world is quiet." The waitress nodded, not realizing that behind those calm words was a woman who had seen the world at its loudest. In chaos, in danger, and in war. On the base, Maria was known as the Silent One. People often forgot she was even there. Yet she noticed everything: who came, who left, and what changed. She had the instincts of someone trained to observe. She knew which officer always walked too loudly, which trainee snuck snacks into the dorms, and which soldier had a habit of checking the windows twice before leaving. She noticed these things not because she was nosy, but because her mind had been trained long ago to pay attention to details. Still, she never let her sharpness show. Her life now was simple. Clean the floors, care for her son, stay invisible. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, a look would cross her face. The kind of look soldiers get when they remember something painful yet proud. Maria Lopez, the night custodian, was more than anyone around her could guess. Beneath that humble uniform was a woman with a history buried deep under layers of silence. She had walked through deserts, seen fear in men's eyes, and carried missions that never made it into any report. But now, she just mopped floors under fluorescent lights, because that's where life had taken her. And though no one on the base knew it yet, this ordinary-looking woman carried a call sign once whispered with respect and awe, Night Viper. Her story was about to surface again, starting with a single joke that would make a Navy SEAL Admiral freeze in shock. The next evening, the base buzzed with excitement. Everyone had heard that Admiral Scott Harris himself was coming for an inspection. He was one of the most respected men in the Navy SEALs, known for his sharp discipline, strict attitude, and a sense of humor that often made people nervous. When the Admiral visited, everything had to be perfect. Floors shined, uniforms were spotless, and not a single mistake was allowed. Maria Lopez had no special reason to care about inspections. She had her own routine. Start cleaning the mess hall, wipe down the tables, mop the floors, and make sure everything was ready before dawn. Still, she could feel the nervous energy in the air that night. Officers rushed around, fixing last-minute details, whispering orders, and double-checking everything. She stayed quiet and continued her work in the corner, trying not to draw attention. When the Admiral arrived, his presence filled the room. He was tall, confident, and had the kind of face that made people straighten their backs. His uniform carried so many ribbons and medals that it told its own story. The young officers stood in a line as he walked past, inspecting every inch of the hall. His boots clicked sharply against the clean floor Maria had just mopped. "Good work, gentlemen," he said in his deep, commanding voice. "At least this place doesn't smell like a locker room tonight." A few officers laughed politely, even though they were terrified to say anything wrong. Admiral Harris had a way of making people feel both respected and afraid at the same time. As he continued talking to the officers, his eyes caught a glimpse of movement in the background. Maria, quietly mopping the floor. For a second, he almost ignored her, but then a small smirk appeared on his face. He was known for his tough humor, and sometimes he liked to test how people reacted to it. "Careful, gentlemen," the Admiral said, turning to face her with a teasing grin. Even the janitors around here might have call signs these days. The room filled with quiet, uncertain laughter. The officers didn't know if it was okay to laugh or not, but they did anyway because when an admiral joked, you laughed. Maria paused. Her hands stopped moving the mop. Slowly, she looked up at him. Her eyes didn't show fear or anger, just calmness, almost too calm. The admiral noticed it but didn't think much of it. He decided to push the joke a little further. "So," he said, taking a few steps closer, "what's yours, miss? What do they call you around here?" The room went silent. Every officer looked from the admiral to Maria, unsure how this would go. Most of them had seen her around but never really heard her speak more than a few words. She was always polite and quiet. No one expected her to answer back. Maria didn't speak right away. She just looked at the admiral, her face unreadable. A faint smile touched her lips, but it wasn't a nervous smile. It was something else. Then, in a soft but steady voice, she said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, sir." Her words hung in the air. The young officers looked confused. The admiral raised his eyebrows, clearly amused. "Try me," he said, folding his arms across his chest. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to respond. But instead, Maria just gave a tiny shrug, turned back to her mop, and continued cleaning. It was as if the conversation had never happened. The admiral chuckled. "Tough crowd," he said lightly, turning back to the officers. The laughter returned, awkward and forced. but something about her calmness stuck in his mind. She hadn't looked intimidated at all. If anything, she looked like she'd seen far worse than an admiral trying to tease her. After the inspection ended, the admiral left with his team, but a strange silence remained in the hall. The officers whispered among themselves. "Did you see how she looked at him?" one said quietly. "Yeah, that was weird. She didn't even flinch. She's got guts for a janitor." Maria continued her work as if nothing had happened. She wiped the tables, wrung out her mop, and slowly cleaned the last corner of the hall. But behind that calm face, memories were stirring. She had been in rooms far tenser than this one, facing men who commanded more power and danger than Admiral Harris ever would. Later that night, when the hall was empty again, Maria sat down for a short break. She could still hear his voice teasing her. "What's your call sign?" The words echoed in her head. She smiled to herself, whispering under her breath, "Night Viper." It wasn't a name she used anymore. It belonged to another life. A life full of missions, darkness, and choices that still haunted her. She had buried that part of herself deep down, under years of silence and normal routines. But tonight, something about the Admiral's question had brought it back for a brief moment. While she packed up her cleaning supplies, one of the younger sailors walked by. He had overheard the Admiral's joke earlier and now looked curious. "Ma'am," he asked, "what did you mean when you said he wouldn't believe you?" Maria smiled gently and said, "Some stories sound like fiction, even when they're true." Then she turned off the lights and left the hall, her footsteps echoing in the dark corridor. That night, the Admiral sat in his office, sipping coffee. For some reason, he couldn't shake the image of that quiet custodian and her calm, confident eyes. He laughed to himself. "Wouldn't believe her, huh?" he muttered. He didn't know yet that he had just spoken to one of the most skilled operatives the Navy had ever trained. And soon, he was going to find out that the woman he joked with wasn't just a janitor. She was the legend they once called Night Viper. The mess hall was unusually quiet that night after the Admiral's visit. The air still carried the tension of the moment when he had jokingly asked Maria about her call sign. People were pretending to move on, but everyone's mind was still replaying that strange scene. The silence, her calm voice, and the way she had looked straight into the Admiral's eyes without fear. It wasn't something they saw every day, especially from someone they thought was just a custodian. Maria, as always, stayed calm and carried on with her duties. She mopped the last corner of the hall and wiped down the steel tables, her movements slow and steady. The officers were whispering nearby, but she didn't seem to care. Her expression was peaceful, but inside, her heart felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, that tiny spark from her old life. When she told the Admiral, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she hadn't meant it as a challenge. It was simply the truth. No one on this base would believe that a quiet, middle-aged woman cleaning the floors at night had once been one of the most skilled operatives in the Navy SEALs. They wouldn't believe that she had led missions through enemy territory or that she had earned the name Night Viper for her ability to move silently through the darkness. Unseen but deadly accurate. But Maria had left that life behind years ago. She had promised herself never to bring it up again. She had seen too much, lost too much, and now she just wanted a simple life. A job, a roof over her head, and time with her son. The Navy world she once belonged to was far behind her, or at least that's what she thought. As she cleaned, Maria could still hear faint laughter echoing from the hall earlier, the Admiral's voice, the officers chuckling at his joke. She wasn't offended. She'd been teased before, by tougher men in tougher places. But something about this night felt different. Maybe it was the way the Admiral had looked at her, curious, almost like he sensed something unusual. Or maybe it was the way her own heart had reacted when he mentioned call signs. That word had opened a door she had locked for years. Later, in the staff locker room, a few janitors and kitchen workers were chatting about what had happened. "Did you see that?" one of them said. "She told the Admiral off without even trying." Another replied, "Yeah, and did you see her face? She didn't even blink. I would have melted right there." They all laughed, but Maria stayed silent. She packed her things slowly and smiled faintly, not saying a word. When she walked outside, the cool night air brushed against her face. The stars were bright, scattered across the dark sky. She took a deep breath and sat down on a bench near the training field. From where she sat, she could see the obstacle course, ropes, tunnels, and climbing walls, the same kind of setup she had once trained on years ago. Her muscles remembered the feeling of those old nights. The sound of boots hitting the ground, the sharp voice of instructors, the endless drills under moonlight. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the memories came back, vivid and alive. She could almost hear her old teammates again, men and women who had trusted her with their lives. She remembered the weight of her gear, the sound of radio chatter, the quiet thrill of slipping into enemy zones without being detected. She remembered being proud of who she was back then. Not because of medals, but because she was part of something greater. But then she remembered the night it all ended. The mission that went wrong. The explosion. The pain in her leg that never healed right. The voice in her ear saying, "We're pulling you out, Viper." That was the last time anyone called her by that name. After that, she had disappeared from the system. The Navy gave her an honorable discharge, and the world forgot her. She preferred it that way. As she sat on the bench, she whispered to herself, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." It was true. No one would. They only saw a janitor now, not the soldier who once led missions through the desert at night. Back inside the base, some of the young officers were still talking. "She's strange, isn't she?" one said. "There's something about her." Another laughed. "She's just a janitor, man. Don't read too much into it." But deep down, even they could feel something different about her presence. The way she stood, the way she spoke, it didn't match her job. The Admiral, meanwhile, sat in his quarters reviewing the day's notes. But his mind kept drifting back to that short encounter. He had made that joke hundreds of times before, usually getting laughter or embarrassment in return. But this woman, Maria, had handled it with quiet confidence. No offense, no flustered reaction, just calm eyes and a soft voice that somehow made him feel like he was the one being tested. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "What's your story, Miss Lopez?" he murmured. He didn't know yet that the answer would surprise him more than anything he'd seen in his career. As for Maria, she returned home just before dawn. Her small apartment was quiet. Her teenage son, Miguel, was still asleep, his schoolbooks scattered across the table. She smiled gently and covered him with a blanket. Looking at him reminded her why she had left her old life behind, to raise him safely, away from the chaos she once lived in. But as she changed out of her uniform and looked in the mirror, she couldn't help but see something familiar in her own reflection. The woman staring back at her wasn't just a janitor. There was still a spark in her eyes, the same one that had guided her through the darkest missions. She sighed softly and whispered, "Night Viper, stay buried." Yet deep down, a small part of her knew that the past never stays buried forever. And after tonight's encounter with Admiral Harris, the silence she had lived in for years had just begun to crack. Something was stirring again, something she couldn't quite control. The Admiral's joke was supposed to be harmless fun. But for Maria Lopez, it was the first ripple in still water. A reminder that even in quiet lives, some stories refuse to stay hidden. The next morning, the whole base seemed a little different. Something about the night before had left everyone curious. The Admiral's little joke about Maria hadn't just ended there. It had started a wave of whispers that spread through the halls like wildfire. By sunrise, almost every soldier, trainee, and officer had heard about the janitor, who spoke back to Admiral Harris with calm confidence. In the mess hall, a few young SEAL trainees were gathered around their breakfast trays, still talking about it. One of them said, "Man, did you see the way she looked at him? I swear she didn't even blink." Another laughed. "Yeah, it was like she was used to talking to commanders or something." A third one leaned in and whispered, "You think she's military? Like, retired or something?" The others laughed it off, but the question hung in the air. Later that day, during break time, two of the younger officers started digging through the base's personnel system, just out of curiosity. It wasn't exactly allowed, but they weren't doing anything harmful, just looking for the name of the woman everyone was suddenly talking about. One of them typed in Maria Lopez. Several results came up, but one of them had a small red tag next to it that read, classified record. They looked at each other. That can't be her, right? The first officer said. She's just a custodian. The other one frowned. Why would a janitor have a classified tag on her record? Their curiosity grew. They clicked on it, but most of the file was locked. Only a few lines were visible. Name Lopez, Maria A. Followed by rank, classified, and call sign, Night Viper. Both officers froze. For a moment, they just stared at the screen. No way. One of them whispered. That can't be real. They looked around nervously, half expecting someone to walk in and catch them. Dude, close it, before someone sees. But it was too late. That small peek was enough. Within hours, the rumor spread like a secret fire through the base. People began whispering the name Night Viper in the halls, in the cafeteria, even in the locker rooms. Night Viper? You mean that Black Ops agent from Afghanistan? I thought she was a myth. I heard she led that night rescue where 12 SEALs were trapped behind enemy lines. No way that's her. She's a janitor. The stories kept growing, each one wilder than the last. Some said she was part of a top-secret reconnaissance team. Others claimed she'd worked directly under SEAL command. No one could confirm anything because the files were locked, but the little that was visible was enough to make everyone wonder. Meanwhile, Maria continued her work quietly, as if nothing was happening. She noticed the extra glances people were giving her. The long stares, the sudden silence when she walked by, but she didn't react. Inside, though, she knew exactly what had happened. It wasn't the first time her past had tried to follow her. She sighed softly as she mopped the corridor, thinking, I should have known secrets never stay hidden for long. That afternoon, she was cleaning the Admiral's office area when she overheard two officers talking near the door. Sir, I swear I saw the file. It said her call sign was Night Viper. One of them whispered. The other laughed nervously. You're out of your mind. That's just a legend. Night Viper disappeared years ago. Maria's hand froze on the mop handle. She turned slightly, her face calm, but her eyes filled with quiet worry. They know too much already, she thought. She finished her work, keeping her expression steady, but her mind was racing. Memories she had buried for years began to resurface. The night missions, the sound of the helicopter blades cutting through the dark, the mission where she had earned that name. Night Viper wasn't just a call sign. It was her identity back then. She was known for her ability to move silently in the night, to strike and vanish without a trace. The Navy had once depended on her. But after her injury and the classified mission that nearly cost her life, she had walked away, choosing a simple, anonymous life. She thought she had buried that version of herself forever. But now, a few careless whispers were bringing it all back. By evening, even the Admiral had heard the rumors. One of his aides mentioned it casually, trying to sound neutral. Sir, there's been some talk about that custodian from last night. The Admiral looked up from his paperwork. Talk? Yes, sir. Some of the trainees found an old file. It mentioned a call sign, Night Viper. People are saying she might be, well, her. The Admiral raised an eyebrow. Night Viper? That's impossible. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. He had heard that name years ago during his own missions. It wasn't just a nickname. It was a legend whispered among elite SEALs. Night Viper was the operator who had led an impossible rescue, pulling a trapped team out of an ambush under heavy fire. Her precision and calm under pressure had become part of SEAL training stories. But she had disappeared after one final mission, and no one ever knew why. Find out who she really is, the Admiral said quietly. That night, as Maria walked across the empty courtyard, she felt the shift in the air. People who once ignored her were now watching her with curiosity and maybe even respect. She hated that. She didn't want attention. She wanted peace. When she reached the janitor's closet, she sat down for a moment, resting her hands on her knees. Her heart felt heavy. She whispered to herself, they were never supposed to find out. Outside, The wind blew softly against the base walls, carrying faint echoes of old war stories. Stories of bravery, sacrifice, and ghosts who never asked for recognition. Maria Lopez, the woman everyone had laughed at just a day ago, was suddenly no longer invisible. Her name, her legend, her past. It was all coming back. And the base that once saw her as just a custodian was now buzzing with a single question. Who is Night Viper? Maria looked out the window into the dark sky and sighed. Let them talk, she murmured. Truth has a way of showing itself, but not the way they think. That night, as the whispers grew louder, the Admiral realized he had unknowingly mocked a woman who once carried out missions under his own command. Missions so secret even he hadn't known the full truth. And soon, he would come face to face with the legend herself. By the next morning, the rumors about Maria Lopez had spread all over the base like a wildfire no one could stop. Every hallway, every break room, every training yard buzzed with one name whispered under people's breaths. Night Viper. Some spoke it with curiosity, others with disbelief, but all with a hint of respect. No one looked at Maria the same way anymore. The same woman who used to pass by unseen, pushing her cleaning cart, now seemed to carry a quiet mystery that everyone wanted to solve. Young soldiers, especially the new recruits, couldn't stop talking about it. You're telling me that the janitor is Night Viper? The same one from Operation Silent Storm? One asked in shock. That's impossible. She's old. Another trainee frowned. Don't let her calm face fool you. I've seen how she moves. That's not just janitor training. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had proof. The stories grew bigger with every retelling. One rumor said she once led a rescue mission that saved 12 trapped SEALs from an ambush in Afghanistan. Another claimed she had infiltrated an enemy base all alone to recover stolen intelligence. A few even said she had earned her name because of her unmatched skill in night operations, moving like a shadow, striking before anyone even realized she was there. Maria knew people were talking. She could feel the glances every time she walked past. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't happy either. Her quiet life, the peace she had carefully built for years, was slipping away. Every rumor that spread brought her closer to the world she had left behind, the world she didn't want to return to. She didn't need to hear the stories to know what they were saying. She could tell by the tone in people's voices. Some were curious, some were proud, but some were nervous, as if the idea of a war hero cleaning their floors made them uncomfortable. Maria didn't blame them. She knew how strange it must sound. A decorated operative now mopping hallways. But she preferred it that way. After what she'd been through, normal was a blessing. That afternoon, the base was buzzing again. Admiral Harris had called a meeting with his senior officers. He sat at the head of the long table, his jaw tight. So, he said, folding his arms, someone wants to tell me why half the base thinks one of our janitors is a special ops legend? The room went quiet. One officer cleared his throat. Sir, there's been chatter. Some trainees found an old file in the archives. It mentioned a Maria Lopez. Her call sign was listed as Night Viper. The Admiral frowned. You're telling me that our cleaning staff includes a classified operative from a top-secret mission? Another officer hesitated, then said, It's not impossible, sir. The timeline fits. The file was partially redacted, but it matches her age and name. And, well, the way she reacted to your question last night. The Admiral leaned back in his chair, thinking hard. He remembered her face. Calm, steady, unreadable. He had joked with her, thinking she was just a humble worker, but now he wasn't so sure. The name Night Viper hit him like a cold wave. He'd heard it before. It wasn't a myth. Years ago, during his time in Afghanistan, there had been talk of a mysterious operative who could move through darkness like smoke. Never seen, only felt. She'd been credited with saving an entire SEAL team trapped behind enemy lines. He looked up slowly. If that's really her, he said quietly, then we all owe her more than we know. Meanwhile, Maria was finishing her shift in the training facility. She could sense that people were treating her differently now. Some greeted her more respectfully, others avoided eye contact, unsure how to act. She didn't blame them. They were confused. But she also didn't try to explain anything. Let them believe whatever they wanted. As she walked through the hallway, she overheard two younger soldiers whispering nearby. "I looked it up," one said. "Operation Silent Storm. It says the extraction team leader was called Night Viper. The mission went bad, they lost communication for 6 hours. Everyone thought they were dead until she brought them back." The other replied softly, 12 men. One woman leading them through the mountains at night. No flashlight, no noise, nothing. Just her voice on the radio, calm as ever. Maria stopped for a moment, her hand resting on her mop handle. She remembered that night. The smell of smoke, the sound of gunfire, the cries over the radio. She remembered the fear in her men's voices and how she had to push it down to stay focused. That mission had changed her life forever. It was the night she earned her call sign. And the night she almost lost everything. Her leg had been injured badly during the escape. She could still feel the ache when it rained. That injury had ended her field career. The Navy had offered her an honorable discharge, along with a lifetime of respect and benefits. But Maria didn't want medals or ceremonies. She wanted silence, peace. She had chosen to disappear, to become someone ordinary. But now, her secret life was being dragged back into the light. And the man who unknowingly started it all, Admiral Harris, was starting to connect the dots. That evening, as Maria locked up her cleaning closet, she saw the Admiral standing at the far end of the hallway, watching her. Their eyes met for a brief second. She could tell he knew something now. His expression wasn't mocking or curious anymore. It was serious. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement before walking away. Maria stood there quietly, holding her mop, her mind full of old memories she had tried to forget. She didn't regret her past, but she wished it had stayed buried. Some names were better left in the dark. Still, deep inside her heart, a tiny part of her felt proud. Not because of the glory or the stories, but because she had once made a difference, and maybe, even after all these years, that still mattered. That night, as she walked home under the dim streetlights, she smiled faintly. The whispers would continue, she knew that. But she didn't need to say a word to prove who she was. The truth was already echoing through the base. The legend of Night Viper had returned, even if she never asked for it. The next morning, the air around the base felt heavy with curiosity. Everywhere Maria went, people glanced her way, some with awe, others with disbelief. It was as if every hallway carried whispers that followed her like shadows. The woman who used to blend into the background now walked in quiet dignity, her simple custodian uniform doing little to hide the calm confidence in her eyes. But Maria didn't say a word. She just did her job as she always had. Admiral Harris, on the other hand, couldn't shake the thought that kept echoing in his mind. Night Viper. The name that once belonged to a legend from the battlefield. He had heard the call sign before, years ago, during an operation gone wrong. The radio had gone dead for hours, and the mission had seemed lost. Then, out of nowhere, a woman's voice came on the line, calm, steady, unshaken. "This is Night Viper. Extraction complete. Targets secured." That voice had saved lives. He never thought he would hear that name again, much less find its owner mopping floors in his own base. By noon, the Admiral decided he needed answers. He called in Lieutenant Davis, a young officer who handled base personnel files. "Find me everything you can on Maria Lopez," he ordered. Davis hesitated. "Sir, her records are sealed under special clearance. I couldn't access them without authorization from higher command." Harris frowned. "Special clearance for a janitor?" The young officer just shrugged helplessly. "That's what I thought too, sir." The Admiral sat back in his chair, deep in thought. A sealed record meant one thing: classified service. Someone, somewhere, had deliberately hidden her past. And only someone with a significant history in covert operations would have that kind of protection. Later that evening, Harris found himself walking toward the maintenance wing, where Maria was quietly cleaning the hallway. He stopped a few feet away, watching her for a moment. Her movements were calm and steady, almost disciplined, like muscle memory from years of training. She looked up, surprised to see him. "Admiral," she greeted politely, standing a little straighter. He nodded slowly. Maria? Or should I say Night Viper? She froze. Her eyes, for the first time, revealed a flicker of something. Not fear, but deep caution. Sir, she said softly. I don't use that name anymore. Harris crossed his arms. I figured as much, but the base won't stop talking. I had to hear the truth from you. Maria sighed and looked away, her voice calm but tired. The truth is, I just wanted a normal life. The Navy gave me that chance and I took it. I'm not an operator anymore. I'm just a custodian trying to earn an honest living. But why hide it? Harris asked gently. You could have taken a higher position. You could have trained recruits, led missions, or retired with honors. Maria smiled faintly. Because, sir, I've had enough of being saluted. Enough of funerals and folded flags. I lost too many friends out there. When I left the field, I promised myself I'd never go back. Not even in memory. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that silenced even the Admiral. He realized she wasn't running from her past. She was healing from it. He nodded slowly. You know, when I first met you, I made a joke about your call sign. I had no idea. Maria chuckled softly. That's the point, sir. No one's supposed to know. For a moment, there was quiet between them. Then Harris said, You're a remarkable woman, Maria. And I'm sorry if my words last night brought back anything painful. Maria shook her head. It's all right, Admiral. I've been through worse than jokes. Her tone was light, but her eyes told a story of battles that few could imagine. As Harris turned to leave, he stopped and said, You know, we could use someone like you even now. Maybe not on the field, but with training, strategy. The recruits could learn a lot from Night Viper. Maria looked thoughtful but shook her head. With all due respect, sir, Night Viper died a long time ago. I just want to live the rest of my life as Maria Lopez. The Admiral gave her a long look, part admiration, part understanding. Fair enough, he said finally. But if the day ever comes when we need her again, I hope Night Viper will answer. Maria smiled faintly. If that day comes, sir, you'll know where to find me. That night, Maria sat alone in her small apartment. On the shelf beside her bed sat an old wooden box. She hadn't opened it in years. Her hands hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside were the remnants of her old life. A folded seal patch, a photo of her unit, and a small silver tag engraved with the name Night Viper. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, memories flooding back. The faces of her team, the missions they completed, and the ones that went wrong. She remembered the nights under foreign skies, the adrenaline, the fear, the brotherhood. And she remembered the last mission, the one that ended it all. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. You're safe now, she whispered to the ghosts of her past. All of you. She closed the box and put it back on the shelf. Meanwhile, at the base, Admiral Harris was still awake, reading an old report he had managed to retrieve through unofficial channels. The file was heavily redacted, but one line stood out clearly. Operative codename Night Viper displayed extraordinary leadership under fire, saved 12 SEALs from enemy capture, injured during extraction, mission classified successful, recommended for highest honors. The Admiral leaned back in his chair, deeply moved. He understood now. Maria Lopez wasn't hiding out of shame. She was hiding out of humility. As the lights of the base flickered in the distance, both of them, the Admiral and the former operative, sat in their quiet corners, connected by a silent respect. He had found a legend where he least expected it, and she had reminded him that true strength often hides behind the simplest faces. And though Maria wanted nothing more than peace, fate had a way of testing those who deserved it least. Because soon enough something would happen that would force Night Viper to return. One last time, you said. The following week, life on the naval base seemed to go back to normal, or at least that's how it looked on the surface. Maria continued her cleaning duties quietly, sweeping corridors and polishing floors, pretending not to notice the sideways glances and quiet whispers that still followed her everywhere. But beneath that calm routine, something strange was brewing. A storm was coming, not of weather, but of danger. Early one morning, a sudden alarm blared across the base. The sharp, echoing siren jolted everyone into action. Soldiers ran toward the control center. Officers shouted commands, and within minutes, the place that had always felt calm turned into chaos. Maria was cleaning the admin wing when she heard the noise. Her instincts, those sharp, old instincts that had once saved her life, kicked in immediately. She dropped her mop, her eyes narrowing as she listened closely. The alarm wasn't a drill. She could tell from the tone. This was real. A group of soldiers ran past her, their expressions tense. "Breach in the north sector," one of them shouted. "Unauthorized drone detected near the fuel depot." Maria froze for a moment. A drone breach was serious. It meant someone was trying to spy, or worse, cause destruction. She looked toward the hallway that led to the observation deck. The memories came flooding back. Those long nights of monitoring enemy movement, reading air patterns, predicting attacks. It was as if the old part of her brain, the one she'd buried years ago, had suddenly woken up. She told herself to stay back, that this wasn't her fight anymore. But as she saw a few nervous young soldiers rushing in the wrong direction, her instincts couldn't let her ignore it. "Stop!" she called out. The soldiers paused, surprised to hear the custodian shouting orders. "You're heading toward the wrong sector. The north fuel depot connects from the east corridor, not the west. You'll lose time if you go that way." The soldiers hesitated. One of them frowned. "Ma'am, with respect, this is restricted." Maria cut him off sharply. "Do you want to stop the breach or not?" Her tone was so commanding, so natural, that the young men didn't argue. They nodded quickly and changed course. Inside the control room, Admiral Harris stood watching the radar screens flicker with red blips. "Can someone tell me how a drone got this close to the base without being detected?" he barked. "Sir, it seems the drone used a low-altitude stealth pattern, almost military-level tactics," one officer replied nervously. "Military level," Harris muttered under his breath. Then he remembered something, the way Maria had described radio signals and field strategies when they'd last spoken. Could she possibly? No, he thought, that's ridiculous. She's retired. But when he looked up at the live camera feed, his eyes widened. On the screen, near the fuel depot, he saw her, Maria Lopez, moving swiftly between containers using the shadows as cover. Her custodian uniform didn't match the deadly precision of her movements. "Get me visual on the North Depot," he shouted. The screen shifted. Maria crouched near a wall, eyes locked on a flickering red light under one of the pipes. A small explosive drone had landed there, its timer blinking. "Sir, there's a live device," an officer gasped. Harris leaned closer. "That's not just any drone. That's tactical-grade equipment. Whoever's controlling it knows what they're doing." On the screen, Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out something unexpected. A small toolkit she used for maintenance. She didn't have proper bomb disposal tools, but her hands were steady. She examined the blinking device for a moment, her face calm, her breathing even. Then she started working on it. Every second felt like an hour in the control room. The officers held their breath. "Who trained her?" one whispered. "No one here," Harris said softly. "She trained us all, even if we didn't know it." Maria carefully unscrewed the side panel of the drone, her fingers moving fast. She traced the wires with precision: red, yellow, black. She knew the pattern. It wasn't the first time she'd seen something like this. Years ago, she'd faced traps far more complicated in enemy territory. Finally, she found the trigger wire, the one that connected the detonation to the timer. Her heart thudded, but her hand didn't shake. She cut the wire cleanly with the small blade from her keychain. The timer froze. Silence. Then she let out a quiet breath of relief. Inside the control room, applause broke out. Quiet at first, then louder. Even Admiral Harris couldn't help but smile. "Get her on the radio," he ordered. "Now." A moment later, Maria's voice came through the speaker, calm and steady. "Drone neutralized, sir. But whoever sent it, they knew our layout. This wasn't random." "Copy that, Night Viper," Harris said without thinking. There was a pause on the other end. Then Maria replied with a hint of amusement. It's been a while since anyone called me that. Then maybe it's time, Harris said firmly. Welcome back, Viper. Maria didn't respond immediately. She just looked around at the smoke rising from the dismantled drone. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. When the incident was over, the base buzzed with new energy. Word spread that the janitor had single-handedly prevented a possible explosion. The soldiers who had doubted her now looked at her with open admiration. Some even saluted her as she walked by. Maria didn't crave the attention, but deep inside, something warm stirred in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt that her past hadn't been a burden. It had been a gift. That night, Admiral Harris found her sitting on a bench near the training field, gazing at the stars. You saved a lot of lives today, he said quietly. Maria smiled faintly. Just doing my job, sir. He chuckled. I think we both know your job description doesn't include defusing bombs. She shrugged. Old habits die hard. Harris nodded, then said, You know, Night Viper, you might be done with the field, but I don't think the field is done with you. Maria looked up at the sky for a long moment before replying softly, Maybe not, but for now, I'm just happy everyone made it home safe. The Admiral gave her a small nod of respect and walked away. Maria stayed there, the night breeze brushing against her face. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was running from her past. Instead, she was standing right beside it, proud, calm, and unbroken. And though she didn't know it yet, this act of courage would soon uncover something far bigger. A hidden threat that would once again call upon Night Viper.